Here we go.
Smoke more tobacco.
Alright.
Oh man.
The rebels don't regret their decision.
So we're doing this? Is that what?
Hello.
Oh boy.
Oh, we got a proper LARP going on here. Oh, it's
Oh boy.
alright.
Okay, I guess this is happening. Let me get some paper. Let me get a pencil, and let me start tracing arguments.
So, I cannot promise.
What?
I cannot promise in general. Alright? Firstly, I'd like to lay it down. Secondly, you know, this is a bit shorthand for me, alright? You know, exactly claim. Alright, don't laugh at me, listen. I can't exactly claim I'll be doing the philosophical legacy of my man's Plato complete justice here, but I'll tell you this, I'll try my little heart out, alright? I'll tell you that. So,
Alright, before we get into that, do you know Boru?
I do know Boru, yes.
So he joined the server with you a week ago?
No, he didn't join the server with me. I actually told him a little bit about our disagreements, and he wanted to join. My understanding is, and he did do this without my consent. He doesn't really listen to me on anything. That he wanted to say a bunch of stupid shit to strangers. So, yeah. He's a performance artist.
So when you were freaking out about being harassed, you were the one that had the mole in my server?
7, can you increase your microphone volume?
Sorry. Let me see here. I might have to restart if this isn't. Also, I didn't freak out about being harassed. All right, that's not really.
Well, you did say harassed.
Well, I mean, not in the serious sense. Is that any better? Is that better? Yay or nay?
No. So quiet.
No. Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to request all of you to just.
Turn you up.
No, just hold on. I'm just gonna quickly restart my computer. It'll take no longer than 2 minutes. All right.
Alright. Alright, well, we've already established something of substance that I was right about. That someone joined the server.
No, well, don't shit talk while he's gone.
I'm just saying, like, this has already been really productive.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
Did you just join yet?
I've been here. I've just been getting paper and coffee.
Alright, good shit. Good shit.
Back.
Alright, welcome back.
So.
So before we begin this,
Mhm.
I guess I'd like to at least state myself as being maybe a mediator behind all this. This is supposed to be a good conversation, and it's a conversation concerning, the various thoughts and movements throughout philosophy. And I just want to say as a mediator that I'm not really, I'm not really partial to any side here, but I'd like to at least say that like if you're presenting a flawed argument, what should at least seems at least apparent to me to be flawed, that I'll at least be able to catch it. And I'd like to be able for people that, if I have concerns about it, to be able to expound upon what they mean. Because I think it's important to kind of dispel any sort of vagueness when it comes to the argument so that we can be as precise as we can when we're trying to articulate what exactly is being going on here. I think there has been, to some extent, a lot of misunderstanding or that has come about in this conversation. I think it's important to sort of really hit at what the actual arguments are and try not to be try to steer as far away as possible from making blatant attacks on people's characters or what have you.
Yeah. No, I can be completely polite. I'm fine with that.
And I'd like for people to be I'm glad everybody is muted, except for the parties right now, and I'd like that to be that way. I think it would be very unfair if spectators would, pipe up and try to, deliberately help the other side here, when really this is just meant to be like a very good conversation so that we may be able to further enhance our understandings and, kind of broaden our horizons. And that even if we don't come to some sort of an understanding, like even if we come to a disagreement, at least we've arrived at something higher. We're able to really flesh out the arguments, because I think really the true loser in any kind of conversation like this is the one that backs out, and the one that resorts to attacks, and the one that doesn't seek to actually further the argument or the real complexity behind the whole the whole conversation. So with that in mind, maybe we can get started and kind of talk about some of the intricacies behind the various sort of topics at play, whether or not you want to talk about empiricism, whether or not you want to talk about theology and theism or what have you.
Yep.
So I just have one preliminary request for anybody who wants to be more closely following along with what I'm saying. I've got a very handy handout here for anybody who wants to just take a look at the argument I'll be defending. This is it. So if anyone's interested in that, just hit that up. But yeah, so there you go. I did restart my computer. My mic is pretty much as loud as I can get it. Yeah, one second. Let me check my sound settings. Yeah,
it's interesting. Sorry, you go ahead.
No, sorry. Windows is saying it's low. I'm having trouble messing with it here. How bad is it in terms of like quiet?
I have to boost you in Discord, but I can hear you quite fine. I don't know if Connor has any difficulties.
I've got you turned up, so I can make do.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting that you bring Anselm into this. I'm curious to see what you're going to hop off onto this. I've actually read the whole text quite a few times, so I even have the book.
Yep.
I think it's like a little yellow book about theism. I can actually pull it out.
Yep.
All right, so you want me to take issue with this and you defend it? Is that what you want to do here?
We don't necessarily have to do that. You can, if you just want to go with an entirely different rhetorical strategy, but if you're interested in like knowing why I believe in God, then like this is what's going on there, yeah. But
so,
if that's not to your interest, we can just talk about something else.
Yeah, okay. So you were born as a Catholic, then you repudiated Catholicism, and then you came across this and you're Catholic again?
That's right.
Right.
Okay. So I have the text.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't actually have the text on me. It's in one of my textbooks, which is like I'd have to fish it out. But
That's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what topic are we going to be addressing today? What do you want to first discuss about? What point of contention would you like to be raised?
All right, well, are you going to just have me go through this and try and take it apart, or do you want to articulate it and explain why you think it's convincing?
no, I can. Yeah, I can. I've presented it before. I can present it again.
All right, on you go.
Okay, on I go. Right. So, of course, we're going to be looking at the section from the Proslogion, it's chapter 2, that God truly exists. As you can tell, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I can break it down at great length. I can break through it quickly. Up to everybody here, really. I'm just going to begin. So the very first premise is just stating what it is Anselm, in the wider Catholic tradition he's working in, takes to be God. What are we actually referring to? What are we actually discussing when we're discussing God? Because something I've noticed that in like non-academic theistic versus atheistic discussions is, and I don't mean this as an insult, atheists generally have no idea what it is like a Catholic means when they're talking about God, and that's not really their responsibility. They're not a fucking theist, right? Why would they have to? But this is what Anselm's trying to tell us, right? He's saying, premise 1, God is something than which nothing greater can be thought. I'll be abbreviating this as NGT, nothing greater than, right? So we can understand this, on the other hand, as maximal perfection, right? And we really have to understand that Anselm has not used a definite article. Anselm is not singling out some one thing, which is better than all other things, right? He's not talking about a really fancy creature or anything like this. He is talking about, and this will be part of the thesis that I'm expressing here, being or existence itself, right? Anselm takes God to be the most perfect, and additionally, existence itself. So that is what I'm defending. That's what I believe in. Right?
God as existence itself?
Yes, pure being. That's right. In the Catholic tradition, yeah.
So how's that different from deism then?
It's different than deism because we stipulate, and this will not be what I'm defending just for in terms of like sheer scope. They stipulate additional theological articles to this, like the incarnation, the death on the cross, right? The atonement for sins, these sorts of things, right? Like uniquely, bit of a tangent, but Catholicism maintains, I appeal to everyone here listening, that God became human so that humans can become gods, right? All the saints say this. This is one of the deeply mystical premises of the Catholic faith. So that would be something that's not being defended by Anselm's argument. It is related. Just in interest of time, I can't actually defend that theory, but that is why it's different than deism. A deist, I hope you can agree with me, would not be additionally committed to these sorts of premises like, it became human, it loves us, like these sorts of other propositions, right?
So, but that isn't encompassed by this argument. So you're using this to argue for a deistic God, and then you're adding on your own beliefs on top of that after you've managed to establish that this God exists. So this isn't, is that right?
Yep, that's 100% correctly. The proofs put forwards by the Catholic saints are not establishing the necessity of the theological doctrines that the Church holds as dogma. They're establishing the necessity of God's existence. They're a proof of God's existence, not of the Catholic faith.
So you're a Catholic that's going to argue for a deistic God, basically?
Yep, that's 100% correctly. You put it 100% correctly. So one of the things that the Catholic Church maintains on a broader ground, and this is true of the history of philosophy, is like the very historical circumstance that these philosophers were working in was completely dominated by the Abrahamic faith, right? By Muslims, by Jewish people, by Christians, right? And they all believe in the same God. They all believe in the same object, right? They all believe in the maximal perfection, being itself, right? You can argue they get this from people like Plato or even farther back, like the pre-Socratics.
All right, well,
So I guess
I
you
accept
could
this
say-
argument. I accept the premises. I accept the conclusions. But I don't accept that a God exists. You're just labeling something a God. You haven't actually established anything that I would recognize or describe as a God. You're just defining everything as God and then using an argument to define it as existing.
That is generally how speculative philosophy proceeds. Yeah.
Yeah, but why?
So
But you're a
you-
Catholic, so
Mhm.
so go on then and establish that the Catholic God exists.
That the Catholic God exists.
Yeah,
Um,
because I accept that everything exists. I accept that reality exists and that there is a maximal reality. I don't accept that God exists though.
we would be here for quite some time. Like I'm willing to do
But you
that.
haven't. But that's what we have to do though, because otherwise you're just saying everything exists, everything is God, God exists. You fine, you can call everything God if you want, but I'm gonna just say everything exists. I accept that, but I don't believe in a God.
No. So that's not exactly true, because there's a distinction between pure being and being as such. So from the kind of general philosophical framework that Anselm would be working out of, in that of like Western philosophy, you and I are not pure being. We're a more provisional or particular form of being, right? We are incomplete being, right?
hmm
So that's kind of, no, that's not exactly what's going on. I'm not saying everything is God. No, I'm just saying that there is some fundamental principle in the vast multiplicity of things which is the form of those things themselves, and that is what I'm calling God, right? And since it's the form of things which are, it causes them, it sustains them, it preserves their being, and it will terminate their being, right? Alpha and omega, right? So I'm not just defining everything as God. That's a bit more of a Spinozist kind of move.
So what
That's not
properties
a-
does this God have then?
Right. So I would say, and this is actually kind of moving beyond Anselm in his argument and directly into John Duns Scotus, but it can be inferred directly, I hold, from all these propositions that this God is infinite, right? Because it's pure being, it's self-identical.
Does that follow from this argument though?
Yes,
How?
I would maintain it does. Right. So if we open up the argument, if you agree with me then that God is a maximally perfect, it's the thing that is greatest, right? It's, the NGT. Truly nothing more noble could be thought of than this thing we're referring to as God, right?
In your definition,
Yeah, I
I
accept
just
the
want to clarify.
I accept the
That's right.
tautology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So if you accept that tautology, then you would see already contained within it is that it must be infinite. Because if it weren't infinite, right, it would be finite. And we could imagine something greater, namely the exact same thing, but we stipulate it's also infinite, right? So we would already maintain, in the Catholic tradition, would already maintain that by the definition that Anselm has put forwards, this thing must be infinite. Yeah.
Okay.
Infinite in what
And
way?
so,
In two ways. So intrinsically and extrinsically. It would be extrinsically infinite in the sense that, like, it will literally, just in the sense that we think of something really big, it'll just stretch on forever. It'll go on forever. It is eternity, right? It is the kind of vast procession of all existence, all non-existence, whatever it is, the world. It contains the world, all this kind of shit. So that's extrinsic, right? That's exterior, that's spatial, that's temporal. We understand that plainly enough, I think. In what sense is the universe infinite, right? That kind of stuff. I think we all get that. But this is unique to Christianity, and this will be very key to Catholicism, is that it's intrinsically infinite.
Yeah, but does that follow from this argument, the intrinsic infiniteness?
Yes.
How?
Yes, it does. Because if you had an infinite... So let's presume you had a merely intrinsic or a merely extrinsic infinite, right? Let's just say it was 1/2 of the pair, right? You could always imagine something greater, namely one which is reconciled with its opposite, right? One which forms a unity with its opposites and is that self-subsistent unity. But additionally, and let's get more into the nitty-gritty here, If it were just intrinsic and not extrinsic, or just extrinsic and not intrinsic, it would become negatively infinite, right? If it were just only interior, it would become a black hole of sorts, a conceptual black hole, if you want to put it that way. If it were just extrinsically infinite, then it would just be a really thin sheet, right? It would just be a large canvas. And in both senses, we can see, even just geometrically, these are bounded, they're binded, they're infinite, but they're negative. They reach a limit, they have a self-determined limit, right? Whereas the positive or actual infinite does not have any such limit. It's a true infinite, right? So this is
So you're talking about
John
geometry, you're talking about physical dimensions, and we would usually describe the universe like that, but you're using this to describe what you call a god.
Yes.
Why would you do that?
To establish the necessity of my conclusion, and then on a more deeply emotional level, to explain the nature of being itself, right? I mean, one of the things that Catholicism does as a religion is it takes all this kind of mumbo jumbo, and that's exactly what it is. Like, I'm not going to pretend this isn't philosophical jargon, right? And this is known truly to religions all over the planet, right? Like, this is no different from Muslim, theology to Christian theology to Jewish theology to Hindu theology. Everyone believes in this sort of perfectly monistic, perfect substance, this infinite being, right? But what Catholicism does, and this is why I appreciate it so much, is it says that this alien thing, this incomprehensible thing, chose to become one of us and to suffer with us and to suffer in our mortal shell, in our being, to face our challenges and to just get into the shit with us, right? There is no other religion that does that and carries it to such an extent that God, right, dies, right? That is what Christianity does, right? You've surely heard Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead. Christianity is, and I claim, the most atheistic belief system that there ever was, because it's the only one that dared to kill God.
Can I have a re-evaluation of this argument? Because I'm a little bit lost here. So, going back to Anselm, Anselm is trying to use a cosmological argument in order to prove the existence of God. And so he goes about and establishes, the definition of God of nothing greater that can be conceived, right?
That's right.
And I think you assent to that.
Yep.
At what point? So you get from that point, right? We're getting from Anselm's definition, and now you're invoking the extrinsic versus intrinsic. What exactly? So how does that align with the Anselm argument?
Right. So the reason it aligns with the Anselm argument, and this has to do with, you have to forgive me that I'm taking some side roads here. This has to do with the fact that, so the primary objection, historically speaking, to Anselm's argument comes from Immanuel Kant, and you can even see on the handout there's this little Gaunilo fellow, and Kant really has the exact same problem as Gaunilo. Kant complains. He objects. He says, well, all you're doing is defining something into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course.
Right? He says, all you're doing is taking this concept of perfection, and you're just saying, okay, so we understand this concept. I hope we can all understand this concept of the perfect, right? I mean, it might be a little bit philosophically wonky at first, but you can all agree with me that in itself, it's not absurd. There is some sort of plausibility in this. This idea of a perfect being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, Kant says you're adding this predicate of existence. You're saying, oh, but also it's real, right? It's really out there. And Kant says that you can't do that, right? And why does Kant say you can't do that? Well, he answers, and you have to forgive me using a bit more jargon, he says that existence is not a real predicate. Kant claims that the addition of existence to any concept does not in any genuine sense help us investigate deeper into it or understand it anymore, right? And for that reason, the argument is just circular. It's just, here's the definition of the perfect. This thing must exist because it's perfect. Bada boom, bada bing, you're back at the definition, right?
Can I just point out
And
that we're talking about Catholicism here? That's what you're actually convinced of. That's your theology.
Yeah.
And your line one item to establish the God that you believe in, that you have all of these conclusions that you've drawn, is this convoluted ontological argument from
that's right.
maximal, what would you call it? Maximal excellence?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah,
Perfect.
look,
Why would he put you in that
it-
position?
it is a fair concern, right? Like this argument that Anselm goes to, like even if you wholly accept the view, forgetting all the objections, only shows of like a theism or kind of a monotheism. It doesn't necessarily state a Catholic tradition.
Yes.
So
That's
that would have to be, you'd have to do two separate arguments. Then you'd have to one show that theism is true, and then you're going to have to add in the second part show that, well, specifically Catholic Christianity is true.
Yep.
Very tall orders. I'm just going to submit. Those are tall
yeah.
orders.
Because you
And
do
I don't
believe in the
pretend-
soul, and you do believe in hell.
Yep.
You have all of these convictions
That's right.
that you can't establish empirically, and you reject empiricism in at least some sense, because you said it died 100 years ago.
No, I said your version of it died 100 years ago, to be clear. So, I mean, yes, I of course hold the general theological doctrines of the Catholic Church. I will state that I do believe that on a speculative basis, on the Hegelian speculative basis in the tradition of philosophy, it can all be established with scientific certainty. I firmly believe that. I will sit here for, I mean, like literally I'm making a career out of it, right? The reason I get food on the table is because I sit down, I take fucking Hegel and all the shit he wrote, and I take Catholicism and all the shit Catholics wrote, and I say, these two things are true. And that's my job, right? So, yeah, I do believe you can get to all those general conclusions from the speculative basis of philosophy that Anselm established, that the Catholic Church established. And let's return back to Kant. I'm not alone. Because what I'm telling you here is a mere quotation. It's a mere imitation of Hegel himself. Hegel has said all of this in his lectures on the history of philosophy. You can read them. After this, you think, you know what, 7-2, you're a fucking idiot, and you went on about a bunch of jargon? Go watch Hegel do. He says himself that Anselm's ontological argument is the only true speculative basis from which philosophy, and hence science, and art, and culture, and history can proceed.
Why do you
Hegel,
think
at least.
these ideas don't gain traction in academia, in your profession?
They do.
Only like
do.
1 in 10
Hegel's-
philosophers are theists like you, though.
I mean, I don't understand the question. Like,
Really?
no, I don't.
Well, let's focus on the argument here more. I have quite a lot of
Well,
skepticism
he talked
here
it
so
up.
far,
He
and
talked up the argument. He thinks it's good. I'm asking him why it doesn't work on other people. The people that actually are trained to understand it and comprehend it and take it apart, they're not convinced. I'm wondering why that is. What are their objections?
What? Oh, so you're asking me what are the common? I've already enumerated the most common historical objection, namely Kant's objection to the ontological argument.
Right. So you have Kant's objection. There is another one, but let's see what your response to Kant's objection is, and then see how this argument holds true.
Right. So yeah, that goes back to what Hegel is saying. Hegel's claim in the lectures on the history of philosophy is that, he says this is the only basis from which philosophy can proceed. That is to say, he is claiming that the conclusion of the ontological argument is indispensable for the function of philosophy as a whole. And we can get into that if you want. But additionally, he's going to respond to Kant, and you'll have to forgive me that what we're talking about here is even escaping the bounds of Catholicism and theism in general. Is Hegel is saying that Kant is on a bunch of skepticist bullshit. Hegel is saying that what Kant is claiming about saying that something exists adds nothing to our understanding of it is intuitively false, right? And the whole object of Hegel's entire philosophical career is to prove that that critique of Kant is true, right? So, you know, we're going to have to abridge some of this history because, like, I just can't get into, like, Fichte and Schelling and Hegel and all that with people who haven't, like, studied it to this extent. I can try and break down the basics, but you know, I think we can all agree it's plausible I can't just enumerate the entirety of Hegel's philosophical method in one call. But no, yeah, so he's claiming that it's indispensable, right? Why should you believe? What is the justification of Hegel's claim? It's indispensable. That's the primary justification. So let's, you know, let me try and at least provide some provisional basis for all this stuff in the argument that Anselm has given, right? You'll see that the third premise, right, is that existence in the mind and existence in reality are distinct, that they're fundamentally different categories, right? And not only that, but that they are fundamentally opposed categories. I want to bring out a brief quote from a philosopher coming out of left field here, Jacques Lacan, who says that thought is the disharmony of the soul, right? And thought is a necessity of our being. So what's going on here, right? What is being posited? That being and thoughts, right? You know, soul and body, essence and existence are opposites, that they form an antagonistic contradiction. And do we not even see this borne out in general philosophical work? The mind-body problem has been one of the most persistent historical problems for the species, right?
Well, not anymore.
Well, I mean, until the revolution succeeds, it will continue to be. So, what?
Okay, so existence of mind and existence of reality.
That's right. Are
So,
yes. And
okay.
opposites. Importantly, opposites. If you have to, yeah, that's Anselm is, and Hegel's defense thereof proceeds off the basis that existence in essence.
All right, well, one of my biggest problems with this is that you're playing really fast and loose with what exists means, because unless existence is physical, it has dimensions, an object physically exists in 3 dimensions and temporally and time, I don't know how you can establish existence in any way that I would accept it. If something exists in the mind, I wouldn't say that's existing, I would say that's an occurrence. That's a pattern in neurons.
Yeah, it exists in the understanding. Like,
yeah, it's 2 different
you're
types of
wrong.
exists. I wouldn't say it exists in the mind.
Yeah, exactly. Wait, what do you mean? So, are you saying that things cannot exist in the understanding?
I wouldn't say that thoughts exist, I would say they occur.
Right, but if they occur, that means that they're moments, right? Like if they occur, they're events that happen.
Yeah, they're events, yeah.
Right, so they would have to involve being to some extent, right?
Well, the way that they occur would, yeah, but they themselves are just a pattern, an event.
That's I don't see why that would necessarily be problematic for I mean, like Hegel is generally understood as a philosopher of event and process, and I don't exactly see how this is.
Well, but what's premise 5 of Anselm's argument usually? It's about existing in the imagination. So why would we expect the logic that we apply to physical objects that exist physically and in time to apply also to thoughts?
Because of the dialectical principle, the unity of opposites. So, you know, maybe I should break that down. So one of the most fundamental and enduring philosophical premises, and indeed mathematical, scientific, and logical, is the unity of opposites, right? Whether we're talking Plato or Heraclitus or Parmenides or Lenin and Stalin, right? In all those centuries of philosophy, there's this kind of one idea kicking around, the unity of opposites, that the understanding of one thing in particular includes and excludes indeed its opposite. To understand light, you must understand dark. To understand good, you must understand evil, so on and so forth. The way we talk about this in our modern set theoretical based mathematics is we call it the law of the excluded middle. that to have truth you must have falsity, right? So yeah, the reason something would be true of two opposite determinations of the truth and of the false,
Well, false is an opposite of truth. Not truth is the opposite of truth.
that's what falsity is.
Not necessarily. No. The negation of truth is not truth, but that doesn't mean false.
That is generally what most logicians understand falsity as, is the negation of truth.
No.
Yeah, I don't accept that at all.
I mean, yes, in like deductive logic, like a false proposition is the negation of a proposition, which is true. That's just what that is. Like that's, like we could debate logic, sure. Like I'm not opposed to that, but that is generally pretty agreed upon. Yeah.
Anyway, continue on with your dialectical principles of the unity of opposites.
Well, I mean, I think if someone if the other partner in the competition is disagreeing with like the law of the excluded middle, I think that would be an important point.
Well, I accept the law of excluded middle, but that's not the exclusion of the middle. You don't go from true to false. You go from true to not true.
As far as I was ever taught, and I do actually teach deductive logic, falsity just is that which is not true. Like I don't understand the disagreement here.
Well, that doesn't fully encompass all possibilities. You have true, and then you have false, and then you have things that are not defined. You can't. It's not a complete negation of true to say false, because you could have unknown not necessarily demonstrated to be false. So it's not. It's not a negation.
That would just be an indeterminate proposition, right?
Okay, but when you're using these things in arguments, you have to be really specific. You can't just assume.
That's right. I am being quite specific. When we're talking about the dialectical principles, we're talking about determinate investigation, right? Like Hegel would not deny that there's indeterminate, like shit out there that can't be made sense of logically. Like I don't deny that either. But we are already speaking of things which we hold to be determinate, things which are susceptible to the mind's investigation, to immanent critique, to dialectic, to all this, right? Like it's just a question of scope. Like yeah, of course there's propositions which are neither true nor false. Like I don't disagree with that, but like why would that have anything to do with Anselm and Hegel and all that? Like this just seems kind of irrelevant. Like I think we can both kind of tuck that away. Like I don't see how that would.
Okay, so premise 5 of Anselm is about existing in the imagination, but I just reject that because for the same reasons I've already given about existing in the mind. That doesn't make sense to me. It's not the same kind of existence.
Right. No. So when we're talking about the unity of opposites, there is a constitutive difference between the opposite poles, right? That's why they're in a unity, is because of their very difference, right? Like here's another way to break it down. It would never occur to you, right, to come up with a sharp and precise definition of distinguishing two things which are obviously distinct, right? If somebody were to ask you the question of, can you scientifically define the difference between the neck and the head, I'm not doubting that there's some physiologist who could do it, but if somebody asked you or I, you would have quite a hard time drawing the line, right? We would have quite a hard time finding the boundary between, right? So you see how, despite the fact that they're in some sense opposed, they have this kind of difference going on. It is that difference which also glues them together. Do you see what I mean, right? It is the very contradiction within the thing itself that makes it what it is, right? And, this will go back to the Catholicism and I think to like stereotypically Catholic themes, is it's not even an accurate description of humanity. That we are what we are because of the struggles we face inside of ourselves, because of our temptation and our desires, because of our want and our strive to be better, right? Because of the lack that we face every day. We all face it in terms of depression and alienation, right? What Hegel and I think what Anselm and the Catholic tradition are trying to get at is what makes a being that being, right? Is this inner lack or contradiction, right? And what they're saying is when you understand that radical negativity within an object, within the self, you see this potential for positivity. You see this ability for it to come back together because it has been thrust apart. You see this radical chance for liberation and joy, right? And this will, of course, dovetail into Marxism, and why Marx is so confident that despite the alienation of the proletariat, they will triumph historically, right? So yeah, I would say there is, of course, and you're right. You're absolutely right, more right than you and I can ever understand, this gulf between our imagination and the world, right? I think we've all faced that, you know.
Yeah, I don't think
any of us
our capacity to imagine has any bearing on what's real and what isn't real. I don't think we should expect that it should.
Yeah.
I don't think our
I
imagination
agree.
should belong in any argument that attempts to describe reality whatsoever.
I mean, I completely agree. We agree that there's this gulf here. But because there's that difference, right? You can see, therefore, there must be, you know, just the ways I'm trying to describe, this unity between the two opposite things, right? Division and unity imply one another, just in the sense that truth and falsity do. So, yeah.
All right, I think, see this argument that you've given me, I think I could do a control replace and take out God and put in, you remember I said Bigfoot a few days ago?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to do it again. I could just take out God and put in Bigfoot, and it would work just as well at defining that
yeah.
Bigfoot into existence. Don't you think that's a massive problem for any argument that attempts to describe reality if it's just a panacea for making anything real?
So that is, of course, if everyone would like to go to the handout, that is Gao Nilon's objection, right? The Lost Island, you know, he is mentioning that. And I think the reply is rather simple. When you understand the very nature, right, the inner constitutive contradictions within Bigfoot, right, you'll see that Bigfoot is chimerical, that it contains contradictions, that it's something which fundamentally cannot be.
And that's the only reason this argument doesn't work for it?
That's exactly right, because the concept of Bigfoot contains like a certain type of absurd contradiction.
Oh shit, we were so close, boys. We nearly had Bigfoot. Fuck.
Yeah, you almost did.
Nearly had fucking Bigfoot.
Yeah, and so the way that this would be expressed formally in the academic setting is it's just a category error, right? When we're talking about being or non-being, or, you know, its synonymous term, God, right? We're talking of necessities, right? When you're talking of Bigfoot or an island, you're talking of contingencies, right? If there were no such thing as an island, the universe is there all the same. But if we're talking about existence itself, right, the universe will not be there all the same, right? It's just a constitutive difference within the categories. It's just a spurious objection.
So what if instead of using Bigfoot, I just say the universe then? Like, if we just take out God and put in the universe for all of the premises and the conclusion?
Yeah, so, you know, this goes back to Kantianism. So when Kant objected to Anselm's ontological argument to God, right, it wasn't just God that was done away with in Kant's critical project. He also did away with the external world and the soul, right? Those are two other beliefs that are being thrust into this problematic position by Kant's objection. So indeed, yeah, if you reject God's existence, you must reject the existence of the external world. That is, if you object to the argument in the way Kant is doing. And of course, that's why Kant rejected the existence of the external world. So, yeah, this argument would equally apply to the existence of the external world, the universe, right? And additionally to the soul. And I think that makes sense because we're talking about creator, creation, and the beholder thereof. So, yeah, there's this kind of three-pronged thing going on. And then, of course, it ties into why does God have three aspects in the Trinity, right? And you can see it all kind of starts lining up. But, yeah, I would say this would also apply to the universe or to creation. And that, yeah, that's how we get over external world skepticism.
Okay, so I need to be able to surmise this argument just so that I'm perfectly clear on this. I have a lot of concerns actually, but let me see if I can clear this up. So the hinge on this whole argument has to do with the premise of like the fact that God has, omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and that when you think about it in the existence of the mind, you have this ability, you're able to perfectly be able to understand this sort of being, and from the fact that you're able to establish that there is, through concept that you can imagine this sort of a perfect being, you get next into looking at Kant's objection that you can't do that because he focuses his critique on existence not being a real predicate.
Yep.
You refute that by claiming that that Anselm's conclusion is indispensable of philosophy as a whole. That's your claim that Hegel made on Anselm. And then you get into the distinction between the Hegelian notion of the existence of the mind and then the existence of reality, talking about being as an event and then thought. Then you invoke Hegel's dialectical principles of unity of opposites. Kind of reminds me of Dasein, actually, in Heidegger. And talking about how you use polar opposites, or how there's like a duality in terms of opposites. From the duality of opposites, you get into contingent and necessity. Is that the next move here?
That's
and
right.
Talking about how Connor's rebuttal about like Bigfoot is only possible in a contingent sense, whereby God is a necessity in that sense. So because God is a necessity, and because there is a unity of opposites, and because there is a ontological argument about how all things have a necessity here, therefore God must by necessity exist.
That's right.
Okay. And this is okay. Connor, do you have anything you want to respond in respects to that argument?
No.
Yeah. Well,
So do you accept then that the argument that God does exist?
No. I'm still stuck on the
Okay.
Bigfoot thing, because if Bigfoot is chimeric, internally contradictory, couldn't you then just posit a universe where that isn't the case, where it isn't necessarily true that Bigfoot has been imagined as being contradictory?
no, because when we're talking about necessities, right? When we're talking about contingency and necessity, that would not be altered by like other possible worlds, because necessities would hold across all of them, right? That's how we actually mathematically deduce facts about like other possible worlds in set theory, is because like a necessary truth would have to be true as much as in this reality as in the other, or else it wouldn't be a necessary truth. It would be contingent upon the condition of, so on and so forth. Now, if you're just saying, oh well, Bigfoot is a necessary being, well then you're just like, this is just a semantic disagreement about whether or not to use the terms Bigfoot. Right, like I don't, and like this is actually, I want to make a brief kind of tangent here. You don't even have to call this God. Like, who fucking cares
wouldn't.
what you call it?
Mhm.
Like, it's just a word. Like, why do we use the word God? Like, we could use like that. Like, I don't even really care.
Yeah, that's why I say the
Can't call it.
universe. I would just say the universe.
I mean, I think that's fair enough too. We can say that. Like, I'm not hung up on the semantics, really.
Well, yeah, I obviously accept the universe exists. I've got no problem with that.
Right. So I guess the question is, like, here's maybe, let's move a bit out of this kind of philosophical jargon zone. I think maybe the difference between you and I on this is I'm attaching this reverence or kind of poetic dimension, this actually genuinely theological dimension, this reverence to the universe that you're not, it seems to me. Right? It seems like I'm like, this is something that should be worshipped. This is something that should be cherished. This is something so wondrous it should matter to us in our life. Whereas, do you agree with me on that? Do you disagree with me?
Say it again.
Like, it seems the difference is I'm attaching this aesthetic wonder, this reverence to the universe, whereas you.
Oh no, I don't accept that.
Yeah. I think that's what I think is going on with theism and atheism. I think it's got nothing to do with epistemic notions of truth and knowledge and metaphysics. I
Well,
think it's got
you
to do
believe in a god that killed every living being on Earth with a flood and allows torture to happen on a daily basis, allowed COVID to ravage the planet. So how's that?
That's right.
How do you? I mean, surely I'm the one that I'm a bit more charitable towards any possible god because I don't even think he exists and lets this happen.
So there is, of course, as I'm sure you have seen coming, there is a Hegelian kind of jargony response to the problem of evil,
Mhm.
right? I don't think you're interested in that. So I'm going to give you the answer that I gave, right? I think that the Catholic religion, and let's go back to Lacan here, is the true religion because it's the one that's fair. The only religion in which God suffered through the shit like we did is the Catholic one. The only God that came onto the table that said, hey, I'm meeting you on these terms.
No, but you don't believe in that god though, because you believe in a maximally great god, and obviously that would entail an incapacity for suffering.
No, 100%.
Really?
Not.
So, well, I imagine a god that's greater than the god that you believe in, and he can't suffer.
This is where we get into the Catholic theology. This is where we get into spiritualism. Is I would maintain as the Catholics do that is an inferior god. A god which cannot feel is it's not even a god to the Catholics.
I don't know why. What is suffering for? Suffering is to avoid noxious stimuli that's harmful, that causes you to not be able to reproduce and live and thrive.
No, I believe that suffering tends to our glory. I think that all the material sufferings in the world, disease, famine, war, torture, every trauma you can imagine, it proves that we endure.
I don't know. I think a god that can't suffer would kick the god that suffers ass. I think it's obviously the case.
Well, I do believe in the god that got his ass kicked by a couple of fucking Roman legionaries.
Mm-hmm.
Can I go back to the previous argument, because I have a couple of concerns that I want to take up and see if you have any response to this. The ontological argument has, when I was studying this in university, this is actually the Anselm thing comes from my undergraduate that I've completed. I have a concern because the view of the ontological argument has some problems with it. Namely, one of the responses, if you read I think it's literally the course textbooks we read was literally called On Atheism, and one of the responses to it is, what if there is no ontological world? Like what if it's you hear this argument, it's called what if the world is just a Russellian world? Like what if these things have just occurred by accident, and that when you're looking for an ontological argument, you're trying to make a connection to all of these circumstances which are just not there? Like what if there is no sort of a hierarching sort of overview? And I'm curious to hear what your response to that would be.
Right. So actually, you might be interested to know that was actually an objection put forward to St. Augustine by the Greek academics at the time, skepticism, right? Mm-hmm. What if these things just aren't real? And I love Augustine's answer, very simple, I'll give it to you. I doubt, therefore I am. The possibility of that doubt implies pure being. You know, Augustine came up with the first cogito, and that's the response, yeah.
Right, but how then, like, just because you can doubt your existence doesn't necessarily necessitate that there is an ontological creation that made you such that where you are now. You see how that follows? Like there is, and I guess this kind of goes into my second concern that I'd like for you to maybe bring up, is the Guanalo, the Anselm and Guanalo back and forth. I think, when Guanalo answers, it's sort of the main concern is there is seemingly like a very, very strong begging the question here. Like you assume so much. You assume that there is such a perfect God that is totally out there and has, divinity over all things, and that creates all things. But that's an assumption through definition. And there's nothing really to suggest here that's able to be borne out other than just like through definitionally being true. But just because you can define something, that doesn't mean it's like really true.
So I actually think that's a much more plausible. I mean, I don't buy it because that's. I mean, I actually do research on this. This is actually something I've written a lot about and talked to a lot of people about and read a lot about. I will say my official view is I do not believe on a logical level it is begging the question. And we can of course disagree about this, but yeah, I would like to first just concede the point and say, yeah, I think that begging the question is a concern that comes up here. But to briefly respond to the definitionally inferring this, that, and the other thing, once again, that's the indispensability thing. Like, to some extent, we need to be able to rationally speculate.
Well, like, yeah,
like,
I get that, but that's not a very strong counter response. Like, I'm saying this not I'm saying this as a very impartial person that took that's both taken the course and is, you know, well entrenched into philosophy. Like, just because you can suggest something is definitionally true and say that it's intrinsic to the world, you know, like, what grounds is that for people to, you know,
that's called
like
correspondence theory of truth. I mean,
right, like we could take like any other philosophic theory, like Nietzsche's will to power. Yeah, like Nietzsche will say, yeah, like what I think is just 100% true and is grounded in reality, and that's it. That's all that there is.
I don't think Nietzsche would say anything of the sort, but if he were to say that, then, like, I mean, first of all, the will to power is actually a direct modification of Leibniz's ontological argument, funny enough. But like, historically, that's like just like a thing in Nietzsche scholarship. But like, what is interesting here is you put forward two objections which are just identical. Like, this is just skepticism again, right? You're just bringing up the problem of skepticism. Like, what if I just doubt this method? What if I just doubt this conclusion? Well, my response is Augustine's response, right? I doubt, therefore I am.
But that's begging the question as well. There's doubting happening.
I'd like to make a clarification. One of them is a skepticism. One of them suggests, well, what if the world isn't ontological? And then the second argument isn't actually a skepticism. The second argument suggests that you're creating, you're begging the question. It's stronger than a skepticism. It's to say that the whole argument rests on the hinge that God by definition exists, and if we can define him and accept that definition of God existing, then he must be true.
Oh, so you have to accept the possibility. You have to accept the possibility exists in the first place. That's just accepted, that there's a possibility.
Well, yeah. So if you want to object that it's impossible for being to exist, then you're just that's a.
Well, you don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to say it's impossible. You just have to not accept that it is possible. It has to be demonstrated that the possibility has to be actually established.
Well, yeah, the demonstration happens on the basis of reductio, right? So if somebody were to say, "Oh, well, you know, I'm not sure there is pure being," it's like, like we can get into it, but like that, I think we can all agree that's very clearly a self-contradiction.
Well,
what does that even mean? Though, pure being? What does that mean?
But that depends what you mean by that.
Yeah.
So when you say pure being is God, like, yeah, no, that is not self-evident to me. But you need to bear that out. Your position must be able to bear out what that is and how it comes to be true.
Yeah, I would also say you don't even think that because the God that you believe in is just full of impurities.
I don't really believe. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but
well, problem of evil just for a start. I mean, can go all day.
That's true, but like that's kind of that's part of a second argument, because even in this whole, even if we were to grant 7.2 this full argument, he still hasn't proved for a Catholic God, right?
Yeah.
So this is not, even if we were to accept this one argument, it's not sufficient to accept the Catholic God. However, I'm not
demonstrate. If you want to tell me, if you actually want me to go on and explain how we get to this idea of and let me tell you that the unity of opposites will be doing some heavy lifting, then yeah, I can tell you how we get to Athanasius and early Christianity. 100%, I can do that if you want, because that objection seems to be the major one, and it seems to be the one that's come up the most. To briefly wrap up the like begging the question argument or objection, the conclusion and the first proposition are not identical, so it's not begging the question, right? The definition of begging the question is when the conclusion and the first premise are the same thing. You'll remember that the first premise is that God is maximally perfect, and you'll remember the conclusion is that God exists, right? These are not identical propositions, so it's not begging the question.
Well, no, the premise 2 suggests this nature exists in the mind, right?
Yes, which is empirically evident from the fact that we can actually entertain the notion of.
No, I don't think anything exists in the mind. I think thoughts happen, and it's just events happen on a neurological, biological substrate.
Well, for events to happen, they must first exist.
No.
Yes.
No. Sound is an event. That's just the rippling of materials. There's nothing existing there. It's just like thoughts. Do you think that electrical signals on silicon is something existing?
Yes.
The significance of it, the pattern, what it means, that
Yes,
exists.
That exists. Yeah, like matter and energy. Like, yeah, of course. What I don't see what.
No, we're talking about existing in the mind though, so that doesn't mean that there's something that resides inside the head. That means that there's a concept that actually exists. I don't accept that.
Yes, I believe that there are thoughts. Yes. Are you? Is this like a limitative materialism that you're doing here? I don't understand the objection.
Thoughts aren't like the actual the concept doesn't actually exist.
Right. So this is a limitivism.
And it doesn't necessarily have any bearing on reality either. It doesn't have to map to anything.
So what exactly are you like this? This
I just
just
reject premise 2 completely.
So you reject that that there is a mind, basically. That's what you're rejecting.
No, I accept that there's a mind. I just don't think that that's an object that exists in any way we would say exists.
So the mind doesn't. You seem to be saying that the mind doesn't exist.
Well, it says here, the existence of God, that nature must exist in the mind.
Yes.
So what does that mean then?
Okay, so let's actually talk about the example that Anselm uses, right? Right? He says let's look 3.1.1, right? When a painter contemplates the design he's about to paint, it exists in his mind, right? If you ask an artist, right? If you look in the chat, right? If you ask a doctor, right? They will imagine, you see, right? The procedure before they perform it, right? We come up with a plan. We say, look, I want the painting. Here's the thing. Let me give a practical example. Over the past few days, my friends have made me play some tabletop games of Warhammer, right? And we sit around, we push little miniatures, and we roll dice, and we imagine that things are fighting, that they're dying, right? That there's this little story, that there's these little kind of soldiers doing this thing, right? That exists in the imagination, right? We're playing a game, right? That is a constitutive part of our life, right? That's not so the nature of the game.
Yeah, you said exists in the imagination.
Yeah, exists in the imagination being part of the mind. Yeah,
Right.
What kind of existence is that?
Of the sort I just described.
So can you? I'm still hung up on this that you don't accept this begging the question, because giving your tabletop example, because you can imagine these soldiers, on this tabletop fighting. Are you going to assume then that there actually did exist a time in a Warhammer, there is a real Warhammer universe where these soldiers are fighting?
Bigfoot exists in the mind.
That's going back to Gaunilo's objection, right? So I would reject that because the little Space Marine soldiers aren't necessary; they're contingent. So I've already given you my answer on that topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who cares? This is the thing. If we can use this to establish the existence of Bigfoot in that capacity, why should we care about it whatsoever?
No, it can't, I don't believe that it can be applied to the category of contingent things.
Well, okay, but this is kind of
you would have to show that it can, right? You would for that to be true.
Do you not believe that I can have Bigfoot exist in my mind?
Yeah, but it's a chimerical, self-contradictory notion, like a Space Marine, right?
Yeah, so it shows that existing in the mind is meaningless then, if things that are just fictional and contradictory can exist like that. We shouldn't care about that kind of existence then, surely. if it can be so divorced from anything real.
Right. So this is eliminativism, right? You're just saying that like beliefs in the mind, like things beheld by the consciousness, are meaningless.
Yeah, they are meaningless. Absolutely.
Well, I mean,
You have to do way more than just show that it can be imagined. You have to do way more than that. And all premise 2 does is say that it exists like that.
That's why the other premises exist, Connor. So, right, like the
Just take premise 2 out then.
stating-
I'm just going to ignore it from now on.
Well, and I'm going to be quite honest. Like you had mentioned how the argument that Anselm talks about isn't begging the question, and you talked about how premise 1 and premise 5 in the Anselm's argument aren't the same, but they are. They really are. Right. The point is God is something that which nothing greater can be thought.
Yeah,
Therefore, God exists.
Yeah, the thing that you've defined in premise 1 as existing is concluded to exist. It literally begs the question.
I'm not
And it's
defining
kind of
something that
strange.
exists.
It
No,
is
I
a little
don't.
strange because in like year 1 of philosophy, in which this is taught, is shown like the professor constantly tries to tell you that yes, this is an example of when you beg the question.
Mhm.
That is a controversial, like that's like we can go look at philosophical papers. That's a controversial question in the literature, is whether or not Anselm's begging the question. Like I don't, like we can get into that, but just asserting that must be the case, like we would have to have a conversation about it.
You said that you
Well-
believe in a God because of this.
That's right, yeah.
So you think this is convincing?
Yeah, I believe that when you actually sit down, read the text, consider I would think when you actually sit down, you read Anselm, you read Hegel's commentary on it, I think it's convincing.
Is this the best argument there is?
Is this the best argument, like, for God?
Yeah. Well, is this the best way to establish the likelihood of a God or the probability of a God?
I actually go back and forth on whether or not the ontological or the cosmological argument is superior. I'm actually not quite sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, I would say they're both fine enough. And we can do the cosmological argument too. I mean, because as I seem to understand it, the primary objection now seems to be that I'm begging the question in some special way. That my first premise.
This has
Well,
convinced
it's not
you, but it's just riddled with issues. Like, I'm not even trained in philosophy. All I've done is things like this with people like you, and I still have all these problems after all these years.
Well, perhaps you should like read the philosophical text I'm talking about.
But you've done that, and you can't defend it.
I've defended it more aptly than either of you have attacked it.
But your colleagues aren't convinced either.
I would assure you that they are.
10% are theists, or 15%. Maximum 15%.
So do you mean that they're convinced that this argument works, or that God exists?
Well,
those are two different questions.
they've considered this, surely. Like, Nuke's come across this, and he's an atheist. He's had to take the course that introduces this to him. He wasn't convinced.
So, frankly, actually, not really. Most people who go to an English-speaking university would not have an in-depth look through Anselm and Hegel's commentaries thereon, right? Like, and Nuke, I'm sure, as professional philosopher, you can see to me that you do not know anything about Hegel's defense of Anselm's ontological argument, right? Like, am I wrong about that?
Well, but I don't understand how the dialectical principle of the unity of opposites somehow skirts away or chips at begging the question, because this is a begging the question argument.
No. Well, so you have to understand that you and Connor have two different objections right now that I'm trying to jump.
Yes, no, that's fair.
Like,
That's
premise
fair.
2, I think, is atrocious. I think that premise 2 is simply outdated.
I think Connor's as a kind of a neutral part in all this.
Basically, a
I
spectator.
do think Connor's objection is different, and it's a little bit. It's a little bit. There needs to be more that needs to be unpacked there for his to really solidly be done. But before I get to that, I'm really, really hung up on this begging the question, because it's very self-evident to me. It strikes me as apparent every time I look at this text, and every time we've covered it in class and evaluated possible objections. Because when you define God as being this perfectly ultimate good, of which there can be nothing greater, And then you assume, well, all things ontologically have a creation and a cause to them, and it can all be traced back to one single root. And then like it's sort of like you're putting pieces in a puzzle that are just kind of fabricated.
This is structured like basically a syllogism. Like you've got your premises, you've got your conclusion, and the premises have to be sound, and the argument has to be valid in order for you to actually establish anything, to do any actual philosophical work.
Premises don't actually. So, like, if you actually go and read Aristotle and his explanation of syllogism, the premises themselves don't actually have to be sound. Like, he goes through that quite extensively, and people who believe that he.
Well, if you want a conclusion that's necessarily true.
No, that's what you're putting forward is exactly what the skeptics in ancient Greece put forward. That's a skeptical position, right?
All right, well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
But yeah, so it's like skepticism. But like, see the thing. So why don't we handle the like? Because I don't mean to be rude, Connor, but it's like very clear this is the layperson not understanding that.
Yeah.
Like what's going on in the argument, right? Like, and like that's not just me being a dick. Like this is quite.
Well, yeah, 85% of your colleagues are of the same opinion that I am, so I think I'm doing all right here.
Well, 85% of my colleagues also aren't vegans, Connor. So.
Yeah, just wait, give it time, let the carnist indoctrination wear off. It'll only take a few generations.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We're getting you, aren't we? You're going to be there soon, or was that all bullshit?
I mean, the reason I'm getting there is because of this god.
That killed every animal on the planet with a flood.
That's 100%. Yeah.
So you believe in a global flood as well? Do you believe in a young Earth? 6,000 years old.
I think we're staying away a little bit.
Yeah, that your position's bullshit.
I think.
Do you believe in a young Earth? Really?
I think we are straying away from the conversation a little bit. But I'd like to. Okay, I don't know what to say about this argument. I'm not very convinced.
Understand the others, like no. I mean, like let me.
How many people are supposed to actually understand and be convinced by this? Holy shit! What percentage of the population are to have any hope of being rationally justified in their conviction that there is a god? If this is what it takes, a syllogism with 4 premises and a conclusion that you're saying we now need to read through heavy, dusty works to even understand.
You can tell he doesn't have a response because he's speaking over me. It's funny.
Can we attempt some more decorum here, please, if that's all right? Because I don't know, 7-2. I'd like you to really kind of this argument. Yeah. I'd like you to. I don't know.
No, so let me try and.
Some of us get a Damascus Road experience, and the rest of us are stuck with this shit.
Well, perhaps you should just read Hegel, man. Like maybe you should actually put in the work.
Yeah, and German. How many people can even speak German?
I think that's an unfair attack, by the way. Because even if I grant you the dialectical principle of unity of opposites, which anyway.
I think that's plausible enough to say as a principle. Like we could get into the controversy. Of
there is, but I'm glad at least you're aware that there is some controversy behind it. I'm willing to grant it. I'm willing to give you it, even though I do know that there is some controversy behind it. I still don't know how you can arrive to a kind of a theism from this.
Well, like so let me try and. Nuke, let me try and re-encapsulate your position in, I think, what is like a credible way, right? Because here's the thing, and I'd like to, once again, like appeal to everyone listening. When I first ran to Anselm's argument, I didn't buy it. It took me about 2 years of thinking about it, and I slowly came to accept it. And let me tell you, like, it was emotionally difficult. But this is a deeply, and this is part of the problem, and I've spoken to people who don't agree with Anselm, who don't agree with Catholicism, and who are much more militantly against Catholicism than anyone listening. And we've hashed this out for hours. People smarter than me, people smarter than anyone else here. And what's going on is Anselm's argument, just in the very principles it's constitutive, is going to appeal to people already working within the tradition of Plato and Aristotle and all these people from which he's getting this. And if you disagree with deeply controversial premises that these philosophers themselves put forwards, the reality of forms, right? The ability to comprehend them with reason, stuff like this. Once again, deeply controversial premises, your evaluation of the argument will wildly differ, right? And I can see why people would disagree very plausibly. And you'll notice that I've never said that none of these disagreements are implausible, right? I would actually say that they are plausible. That's why I'm working through them, because I think that this argument does have some merit and it can work through them. So do you think that that's an adequate capturing what you're saying, that there's just deeply controversial assumptions going on here that you're not completely sold on, that you want to work through? Is that kind of what you're telling me, Nuke?
Well, yeah, because I see like quite a number of contention, let's just say.
Exactly, yes. So, and let me also permit me one more tangent, everyone, right?
Okay.
And this is something that I think is actually quite interesting here. Some of the disagreements going on with the method I've deployed are also political. And this is something I find very, very interesting about the argument, is that if you believe in the sorts of things that Plato and Aristotle believe, you are very predisposed to, in my opinion, like deeply Marxist, communist politics. And I've actually noticed, funnily enough, I've went around with my notebook and taken notes of people who sympathize with my position and those who don't. And every single time, communists have sympathized, capitalists haven't, without fail, right? Without fail. At least in my department, I mean. I'm sure that's not true with lay people, but within my department. So yeah, like there's, and this is I think why Hegel focuses on it so much, right? This is one of the most famous or infamous arguments of all time, right? This is something that deeply matters from a Western philosophical perspective. And of course it's going to generate contentious disagreement and controversy. But, and once again, I'm appealing to you here, doesn't that prove that there's something worthwhile in it? We've asked a million times, oh, well, everyone disagrees with it, so it must not matter. But nobody can shut the fuck up about it, right? So there must be something about it, you feel me? Like
well, a lot of it is confirmation bias. You have religious people that want to be able to justify what they were indoctrinated with from birth.
That's just fascist nonsense.
That's just how it is. That's just the psychology that you've got.
That is not a very philosophic answer.
Oh no, I'll defend that. We can go for 2 hours on that too. Yeah, we can go for 2 hours on that too. I mean, yeah. 100%.
I don't
Well,
think
like you're the first
this is a
person.
really valid.
You're pretty
argument.
much the first person that I've come across that actually claims to be convinced by the ontological argument.
Have you ever spoken to anyone?
And also, you were born a Catholic and you still are one, so the argument didn't do anything.
I'm not sure this is super sharp either, but so your point concerning
People are convinced by emotion, and then they use reason to justify it afterwards. It's just a fact of psychology. You can pull me up about that, and we can talk about that and use links later. But I'm fine with just leaving it at that for now.
You mean the facts of psychology conducted within bourgeois institutions looking to preserve the reign of capital?
What is going on?
Well, all you have to do is
No.
argue about veganism, and you see the defense mechanisms kicking in. People try to justify the beliefs they already have. They say pretty much anything. You already know about this.
I asked a few vegans about what you said, and they all called you a Nazi too, buddy.
No. This is not in the spirit of what's going on here. We have derailed from the argument.
I mean, I'm just saying, not even vegans take this guy seriously. At least my camp actually takes
I'm not listening to this anecdotal, whatever.
Yeah, you've maintained the religion that you were given by the borders that you were born on that side of, so you've proved my point for me. I mean, you didn't find Islam, did you? You're still a Catholic.
I actually have studied quite a bit of Islam, and I deeply appreciate much of what it says. I mean, they also agree with the ontological argument for its work.
Well, it was to no effect, because you're still a Catholic.
Well, it was to the effect of making me a Catholic.
Okay, like this, guys. This is we have departed from the argument. Okay, this is now just anecdotal. I don't know how much farther we can go on from here. I'm still, and I'm being honest, and I don't have many. Like I don't have a kind of a Like I don't have cards in the game. Like I'm not here to try to. I'm not a cheerleader. I'm looking at the argument, and this argument has questions towards it. And I think it's important to remember, like, this is a big question, right? Like, if you can assume, if you're able to establish theism, this brings about many metaphysical quandaries and many metaphysical goals in which many once skeptical have to adopt. So this is a big thing. And look, I'll give you some credence here. Like, it's not easy to come and defend your view, right? And to try to come speak quite plainly in front of a large audience and stuff. So even if I have these questions, I respect you at least coming out here, and I respect Connor doing this too, and trying to test your mettle here. I think it kind of derailed a little bit at the end, but as a kind of a bystander and a kind of a mediator behind this, I think this argument is a little bit. I am personally not convinced.
I think we did a decent job of listing all the usual objections that are still unresolved.
Yeah. And I think I will say this. I think Connor's question about Bigfoot, for example, I know you have this thing concerning contingent versus necessary, and I think that, I mean, it's a response. I'm just not sure what to make out of that response, because you can just what if Connor just says, well, what if Bigfoot is necessary and not contingent?
Well,
what if
we're not talking about Bigfoot, right? Because like that's so. I would actually like to address some of what's going on here. Once again, I would appeal to everyone just to listen up. Is that like I mean what I'm saying about skepticism, right? Like everything I've said, I'm genuine in here. So one of the questions of, and let me cite Adorno, right? And a lot of things can be said about Adorno. That he is a rationalist sympathetic to the project of Plato and Catholicism is not one of them, right? I don't think anyone would say Theodore Adorno is my guy, right? Or the guy of the Catholic Church, for that matter.
Okay.
Right? But he does have a passage in his Negative Dialectics about Hegel's defense of the ontological argument, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he points to it as the culmination of a deep-running vein of philosophical realism that went through the Western world and, again, culminated in Hegel, right? So what I mean here is one of the fundamental controversial assumptions going on with Hegel and Plato and people like this is an epistemic confidence in human reason to exhaust all truth in the universe, to truly know what's real in and of itself. Now that is a hugely, deeply controversial philosophical premise, right? And I completely understand why people are not necessarily skepticists, but anti-realists about it. So I'm willing to have that conversation. But I think we can all, any of us who is seriously interested in speculative philosophy and what it can do for human emancipation, the project of realism, of believing things are real, that we understand them, that we matter, is not something that can be conceded on the grounds of Bigfoot. Right?
Well,
I don't
fair.
think Bigfoot is as absurd as a universe that's less than 6,000 years old.
Like what I get what you're saying, right? But the problem is that if you wanted to argue about realism, okay, like I have a bag of arguments that would be very interesting, and I'd be curious to hear yours too. But the problem is this isn't just realism. This is theism, and
that's my claim. One and the same. Theism is
that is insanity. No. I'm closing this down. This is getting closed. We're closed. We're closed. We're closed. This is closed. This is
all right,
closed.
Well,
No.
You didn't hear from me, folks. Catch you later. Any last words, 72?
Any final remark?
Yeah, I appreciate you coming out. I thought this was good. All my homies out there, I love you. I wouldn't be here without my professor, without my life coach, who is also my professor. Lloyd Gerson.
He's got an Oscar.
Where you are. I exactly right. I'm repping. All right, I'm repping. If you're not convinced by me, you'll be convinced by Hegel and the Saints. So that's it.
Connor, any final thoughts or anything you want to say before we wrap this up?
Embrace empiricism, rationally justify your beliefs. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. I'm out.